So this is what some kids look like going to school. These might be your children. If they are your children, you should probably have better digital citizenship, not to make their photos public on the internet. But this is kids going to school. We can start to imagine what they have in their backpacks. We can imagine that they have at least a social studies textbook. If they're in one of my AP World History classes, they had a social studies textbook as well as the document source reader, so they got 2 textbooks because they were really smart kids. Okay? But then there's also the math textbook, and that's a huge textbook. And the science book, they always made them like a bigger diameter than everything else. Right? And our kids are walking to school with 50 pounds on their back. Now, in addition to the books we're asking them to carry, a lot of them have schoolwork. They might have journals. They might have folders. If you have like an Avid program, they have a huge 6-inch binder that they take with them. They have a lot of stuff. And if this stuff is left at home, the kid is crushed for the day, right? All of my stuff is in the bag. And you might say to that child, you might say to Johnny, Johnny, you have a locker. You don't need to bring your textbooks home every night. But Johnny keeps on bringing his textbooks home. Sarah, you have a locker. You don't need to. Some schools give the kids 2 textbooks, one to have at school and one to have at home to try to eliminate this. So putting the textbooks aside, there's all the student work that they're creating, their homework that they did on paper, their assignments, their essays, their permission slips. Everything is on paper so that this is their lifeline. And if they do not have this, then they're calling mom or dad. And the reality is that moms and dads have jobs, or even if they are a stay-at-home as their job, they are not excited to come to school and deliver a backpack. Or if you've ever had the situation where you have to call the bus garage because the kid left the backpack on the school bus. In my last couple of years in a school, that was one of the biggest problems I had to do. It would literally take around 30 minutes to get the appropriate bus garage on the phone, to get the appropriate driver to then go and search the bus and then retrieve the backpack. It literally took like 12 people to get this backpack. So we understand the value of this traditional backpack. The kids understand the value. The parents understand the value because it's so important. In fact, I even carry a backpack around, but it just has a laptop in it. And you know what? If that laptop disappeared, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. It wouldn't be a big deal. Probably all of your stuff disappeared either. If I lost my wallet right now, right, our credit card companies could get us credit cards by tomorrow. Right? We live in a world that we should not have to have huge backpacks. 1959 was the first commercially available Xerox copier. Okay, my dad worked for Xerox. He was a custodian for my school growing up and then got the big job working for Xerox. And he was all about the history of Xerox copiers because they changed the world in 1959 with this copier. Everything that had existed before forever changed. And this thing was huge, right? And it was printed very slowly and it was not the greatest quality. But they had a huge ad campaign, and everyone got one. And in fact, everyone still gets them. This is like the best piece of sustaining innovation ever, because no one questions that they need one. If you're going to open a school, you're just throwing this on the list. And as a result, these things are still really expensive. Right? They were expensive when they first came out, and they're still really expensive today. So that's 1959. Fast forward to 2011, the birth of the Chromebook. 2011, at the Florida Education Technology Conference, Google had a laptop at their booth. And people said, what is this? And it was a Chromebook. The first Chromebook was made by Samsung. It was black, and it was $350. The Chromebook came out after the netbook disaster. Did anyone here ever buy netbooks? Okay, that was the netbook disaster. You were either going netbook and iPad, and a netbook was a full computer, so you're like, I'm getting a netbook. And Google saw that and said, hey, we can do something very simple with our operating system. Because there was obvious limitations from an iPad. An iPad was very hard to submit student work. And the netbooks were so painfully slow and the batteries took forever that the Chromebook entered the scene. And that became very quick. So $350 a device, people were buying a lot of them. And then Samsung released their version 2 the next year in 2012 around Christmas time, and that was the $250 Chromebook. And they took out a full page ad in the paper, the $250 Chromebook, because that was the first time we had ever seen a computer that cheap. And now we have these HP Chromebooks, I have a couple laying around, that are now down to like $170. A science textbook is like $110. Well, unless you're able to find some value brand science, and then it might be cheaper. But textbooks are very expensive. So 2011 was a big game changer in education. Now, what does the future look like for our schools? I made the joke when you were entering. I said the football team's probably not practicing today because of the rain. They probably won't be out in the field. Maybe they're doing virtual reality practices. And the reality is that maybe they are. because a lot of football, to my understanding from my nerd psyche, is that a lot of it is memorizing plays. So you can practice plays and memorize plays without actually running them. Now, I know timing's very important, but understanding the basics. So we now have the birth of virtual reality, and virtual reality is mainstream, right? You have the Oculus that plugs into your Xbox, and your kids are playing virtual reality that way. You have a lot of companies exploring how to teach their people how to do work in a VR simulation. NASA did a lot of work with Microsoft's HoloLens, an augmented reality tool, so that space astronauts would know how to do things on the space station without actually having to go there first. Or if they got there and they didn't know how to do something, that they could put on their VR lenses and it would tell them what buttons to push. So that is where the future is. Now, none of us are actually here today. This is not a one-to-one experience in any school. And that's okay. I think that there's not enough there yet for us to say every classroom should be a VR-enabled class. We don't necessarily know what that looks like. We don't know if that's good for kids. We know that our kids can spend a lot longer in a VR headset than we can. If we do it at our age for about 30 minutes, we'll get a headache. Our minds aren't made for that. But our younger minds are actually more plastic and are able to adapt to it a lot better than we are. But that's not where we are. We're mainly here, and we're flirting with a one-to-one solution, but our one-to-one has to be purposeful, because if it's just another thing that we're going to stack on a student's desk, it's a waste of time, right? You have your textbook, your journal, and you have a Chromebook. If you are stacking that many things, we know that something's going to fall off the desk, and sadly, it tends to be the Chromebook falling off the desk, and it's because we've piled onto learning instead of reducing the things. Mark Zuckerberg says it's not about adding new features, it's about taking things away. So when you introduce a one-to-one initiative, what do you now not have to do as a result? And we need to get serious about trimming things out of what we put on our kids' desks so that the Chromebook is not at risk of falling off, so that the Chromebook does become the learning tool and not just another pencil or another textbook on the student's desk. Now, there's two reasons why a school would want to go paperless. The first reason they would want to go paperless is to save money. Anyone here work in purchasing, or someone who has a budget for their school or looks at a budget for their school, you understand that printing is ridiculously expensive. Okay? Looking at some of our research here, it costs an average 5 to 8 cents per page that you print as a teacher. Okay, so if you think of how many things that you print, now me as a teacher, I'll be very honest, I printed around 10,000 sides every semester. So 20,000 sides is what I was printing before I went paperless. 20,000 times a nickel ends up being a good amount of money that I was spending printing. Now, if someone had said, Joe, if you go paperless, we'll give you this money to do whatever you want in your classroom, I probably would have taken the money and done something better in my classroom, because even though I thought printing was important, I did not hold it to the value of what it actually was. And if we look at what the breakdown, and I have a citation on the bottom at the end, I can send you the link for that, but 44% is your supplies, going to the secretary and saying, why didn't you order this, right? Usually with not the nicest smile on your face, usually in anger. Hardware acquisition, your IT folks having to go out and buy this or lease this copier. Fixing repairs, I remember the Xerox guy from my building, he would spend all day on his back with a big black briefcase, like working on it like a car, like you were changing the thing's oil. And then related support. The time your secretaries or whoever is managing your copiers and printers has to take out of their day, because they have value too. They are getting paid to be there, and if you're saying your job is to babysit the copier, then that means that there's a million things that they're not doing. So both cost and time become really big pull factors on why you would want to go paperless. The number one reason, though, ends up being that you don't need paper anymore, because anywhere you go, everything is with you. Okay? Right now on my smartphone, I could access every single tax I've ever filed. I could access every single homework piece I've ever done. I could access my latest graduate work from wherever, because I have an internet connection on a device. This one's an iPhone. That could be a Windows phone. It could be an Xbox 360. Whatever connected device I have, I can now get to the cloud and get to it. Where when I taught in the city of Rochester, or where I taught in the city of Rochester, we had an 80% poverty rate. We couldn't expect our kids had fancy laptops at home. And we were not going to send Chromebooks home with them, because that would make our kids targets, because they had to take city busing to school. So we had to create a platform or find a platform where they could access their content from anywhere. Because the last thing we want to do is tell kids, hey, we're paperless, but you have no way to access all the digital learning at home. So we ended up, as a school district, going Google so that folks could have that access, because we knew that even the poorest of our students still could access a smartphone, or they could get to the public library and be able to access all of this information. Now, of course, there was some parent pushback. Why are you asking my child to go to the library? Or why is everything electronic now? And there is pushbacks with all of these factors. That's what means that progress is happening. Conflict has to happen in order for real change to occur. So what we used to do is we would actually have parent presentations where we would bring parents into the school. We would explain this cloud. Okay, I gave a training to some folks just the other day where they thought the cloud was actually like a satellite, where like the cloud for Google for you folks is most likely South Carolina. Okay, or if you're a Microsoft school, I think there's one right in, there's a Microsoft data center right in Massachusetts, I believe. So people don't necessarily know what this cloud is, and then they're not comfortable with it, and they don't understand why it matters. And if you're teaching in a school with high poverty, they don't necessarily have email addresses, or their usage of the computer is not for the work like our usage is. It might just be limited to social media and some games because their professions or lack thereof do not have them enticed. So one of the things we also did was we created every parent a Google account. So they had a Gmail account, and we had Learn How to Email nights. Well, now that might not make sense to your school or your demographics, but for us it did at the time. Now, Google is this entire suite. Another misconception we see is that people are saying, oh, we've gone Google, meaning that they've given everyone a Google account, meaning that every kid has a Gmail account, like I'm a student at gmail.com. Just to clear that up really quickly, that's not what we talk about when we say G Suite for Education. G Suite for Education means that it would be like, t.smith55 at myschool.org. And actually be within your district's domain, that web address. And that way you can have your free Google Vault that allows you to not only check emails, but also check every file and have all of that HIPAA, COPPA, SIPA, and FERPA compliance. And that's why we need this full solution. Having kids sign up for independent Gmail accounts may sound like you've taken your school Google, but that is the worst thing you can do in the world. And if you've done that, please see me after so that we can start fixing that for you. But when we talk about the G Suite, it is a huge suite of tools, and it is all-encompassing. Now, Google Forms, it didn't make it on this one. It should have. Google Forms, my favorite. You might say, I don't need Google Forms. I love Kahoot. Anyone here love Kahoot? Okay, that's a great program. But if I want my entire district embracing Google in order to go paperless, I might not focus on Kahoot, because I know the teachers who are going to love Kahoot are going to naturally find Kahoot. But I just want them to be using this digital environment and not get overwhelmed with the amount of options. We want to make it as simple as possible, because I'm not going to be able to tell every one of my teachers, hey, you have 40 minutes to learn Google every single day. It's a new planning period for you. I just want you to become really good at technology. Now, some of you might have grants that allow you to do it, and that's awesome. But in reality, our teachers are very stressed and pushed very far to begin with. So we need to say, this is the simple set of tools that we recommend. This allows you to do 90% of the things we think you should be doing in your classrooms, and we think you already want to do in your classroom. And we're going to provide you some support to get there. So the new classroom, anyone have classrooms that look like this yet? Like a learning suite or a...
We have one.
You have one? So what...
High school.
So we have learning suites, learning discovery areas, self-paced learning centers. This has become the new media center, or in many cases, the new classroom. We work with Heather Staker from the Christensen Institute on blended learning, and this is a real transformational shift of your egg carton schools. If you think of a school, it's like an egg carton. You have a hallway with classrooms over it. You go inside the classroom, and you have cemetery seating. Okay. Now, you might try to do the group seating, but the kids act bad, so you change it before Thanksgiving, and then you try again in the spring. That's how I always did. But this is the newer classroom where spaces are flexible. Our students have the devices, so they don't need this because they have miniaturized these in front of them, so they don't necessarily need this. And it's not necessarily about the presenter in the room or the teacher in the room. It's more important about their conversations with each other and them having breakout huddle spaces to teach each other. So that is the new classroom of today. It doesn't have VR headsets yet, and I don't know what VR headsets would look like in that environment, but that's definitely where things are going. So how do we harness our resources to transform? How do we get people to change? Because people don't like to change. Does anyone here like to change? Okay. I hate putting on socks, personally. Okay. Putting on socks in the locker room is the most painful experience of my day. So I don't like to change. Most people don't like to change, or most people think that if they have to change, they need a whole bunch of new stuff. Oh, I can change, but I need this, this, this. Right? If you've ever started like a workout plan, you're like, I need to change my exercise habits, but first I need shoes, new gym clothes, new gym shirt, and you start thinking about all the resources you need to get before you actually change. When in reality, the resources that you need are free. You have Google already, or you can get Google very quickly, and the devices have become very low cost. And it doesn't even matter if you own the devices or not, right? You could be one-to-one in a bring-your-own-device school. Many of you might come from schools where it might be a perfectly fine expectation that every kid would have a really awesome computer that they could bring to school on a daily basis. That would be a BYOD school. Some of you might have mixed carts where you have some laptops and some Macs and some iPads, and you just make it work. But the resources are becoming more apparent. What is not apparent is coming up with a plan, where we see some schools becoming accidentally one-to-one. Was that one school that accidentally became 2-to-1? They did the math and they found out that they had 2 devices for every child, and they had no idea, and then wondered why they were not 1-to-1. And I had another school that decided a week before school started that they were going to become 1-to-1, and they didn't have a plan. Both of those resulted poorly. One was a huge waste of funds and oversight. The other one was a whole bunch of digital citizenship issues because they had not planned for every kid having a device. Once every kid had a device, it was game time free-for-all. So the first step is communicating electronically. And that's something, if you're an administrator, you can start to do. When I took over in my school, we used to communicate 3 ways. We would make a PA announcement to teachers for staff meetings. We would email teachers reminding them that there was a staff meeting. And we would put a note in their mailbox letting them know that there was a staff meeting. Okay. The idea was, as long as we notified them 3 ways, we weren't going to get in trouble for them missing a staff meeting. And I thought about this a lot as a teacher, and I was going on to be an administrator at the time, and I thought that really deprofessionalized us. If you needed us to feed us information 3 different ways, that was really disrespectful to who we are. And it was also setting a bad example that that's how we should give information to our students in 3 different forms, because that's what we were currently doing. Read the textbook here, read the online article there, and write in your netbook or your notebook over here. So one of the first changes we made is that every staff meeting was sent out via email at first. And then we eventually figured out that Google Calendar was a better solution, and we created a Google Calendar of staff meetings. And we stopped making PA announcements. The first time, we had to do a PA announcement because people were conditioned to it. So we said, please check your shared calendar. There is an important event after school. Okay? Built some suspense. The second thing we also did was I put a little note in everyone's mailbox telling them to check their shared calendar, and I put a Hershey Kiss on it. I figured a little piece of chocolate would go a long way. I had teachers who refused to check email. Okay, you might have teachers that refuse to check email. There was one guy who was much taller and stronger than me who I was very afraid to tell him that he needed to check his email. He eventually confronted me in the hallway, and I thought I was going to I didn't think he was going to physically hurt me, but I thought he was going to bully me a little bit. And he said, Joe, you are just so darn persistent. I checked my email today. Turns out there's a lot of stuff in there. But it has to start from the top. Because once you show a shared Google Calendar to teachers, teachers are naturally going to show it to their staff, to their students, and their students will naturally use it. Right? It's a trickle-down effect. If we look at Pinterest, who here used to block Pinterest in your schools? Right? It is no longer blocked anywhere. Most schools do not block Pinterest because teachers saw it and they said, hey, I can use it in education. And then we opened it up, and now they're sharing lesson plans on Pinterest left and right. So the first steps, invest in a training plan. If you don't know what you're doing, reach out to your neighbor schools and ask them what they've done. Send all important documents and memos electronically. Right? It stinks. If you've ever had to put paper in everyone's mailbox, it's the most painful thing in the world. Create a Google Calendar, place all important events, and share it with staff members. And don't feel like you have to type notes, because I actually made it. I put this all on one Google Doc for you, and we'll share the link at the end. So I boiled down the 10 steps into a nice 2-page little article. So create a Google Calendar and place all important information on it. The secret here is to make the Google Calendar yourself and share it with everyone by name so that they don't need to accept it. Because if you have to rely on Mr. Smith or Mrs. Smith to accept a calendar, an invitation to share a calendar, there's no way to confirm that they've actually gotten it. Whereas when you share it by name with each teacher, they can't reject the calendar. It's automatically going to load in their Google Calendar. For my staff of 60, that meant typing in 60 teachers' email addresses, and that was an hour of my time, which might have seemed like a waste. But if I went around to make sure that each teacher was able to open the calendar, that probably would have been more than an hour. Require committees to take notes during meetings and share it via Google Docs to the rest of the team. This exposed a whole other problem in our school. We had people taking notes, and then they were just keeping it to themselves. And you know what notes they wrote? They wrote their version of the notes, which is awesome because you can go to a meeting with 5 different people and get 5 different takeaways. When you have them working in a Google Doc, they're able to see that, why is Josh writing this? Josh, what are you typing? This is not what we agreed upon. And you're able to find the conflict before you publish it. And you're also able to share it with the building leader so that when the State Department comes in, they're like, we want to see examples of collaboration in your 7th grade. The principal can quickly say, oh, I have a shared folder of all of our 7th grade team meetings. Would you like to look through the minutes? We also have a shared calendar of when that team meets. Would you like to sit in on their meeting? And it allows the principal not to be constantly running around figuring out what's going on, but to have that information accessible to him or her. The next step is celebrating staff who have gone paperless, who have reduced their paper. That doesn't mean that you're punishing people who have not gone paperless. You got to be very clear here. You are celebrating those that are not using paper. So one of the ways we celebrated is every teacher that went paperless, we bought a big screen TV. Not for their house, but for their classroom. Because a problem arises once you go paperless, it's really hard to display student work. So what we did was we went on Black Friday to Best Buy and we bought 50 screens. And we hung them up in the back of every classroom and gave every teacher a thumb drive. And they put the thumb drive of pictures of the student work, and that was showing as a slideshow in the back of the room. So every classroom got digital signage. Why? Because they were paperless and they needed it. So we weren't showing favor to those teachers. We were simply solving a problem they now had as a result of going paperless. You'll see that words and phrasing matter a lot when you start going down this road. So once you start celebrating, you've got some movement, maybe 30% or 40% have gone paperless, you then have to shut off the faucet a little bit. So the first one is limiting the amount of printing and copying that teachers can do. Now you might already do this. Anyone here currently limit? You have a paper cut solution or something like that. Every teacher gets 10,000 sides per semester, or 6,000 or 4,000 sides. Now, an interesting program out there is Papercut. It actually tells you when you log onto your computer how many trees you've killed, how many light bulbs you've burned, and ready for a new feature that's coming out shortly. I don't work with Papercut, but a new feature they have coming out says the money you spent printing could have fed this many families in a third world country. Now that might be a little extreme. They're an Australian company, so they think a little different. Toilets flush a different direction. Okay. Invest in digital displays, right? Lack of printed work means that we have to. We also invested in paper when we went paperless. We bought poster printers. We bought these huge rolled poster printers so that we could make these huge banners in the hallway of student work. Because now that everything was electronic, we could design these so they looked like banners of learning, and we only printed stuff that was good. So if we were going to print a student's work, it needed to be their best student work that they'd ever produced and that they would be proud of to have in the hallway, because we would make these permanent displays where their work would be up there for 6 months because it would be exemplar level work. We would train the parents and involve them in the process. Hey, your kid's not bringing a notebook home because it's all here, and here's how you can access it. And we over-communicated that because our parents, because of the high poverty and low success rate of the district as a whole, were skeptical of any solution that we were trying to provide, as any parent should be skeptical of any change. So we over-communicated, and we started transitioning the library. Now, the library was still the housing of books and textbooks, but we started to we extended our school hours to have some digital resource time in case kids did not want to go to their public library because they didn't feel it was safe, or didn't want to go access the free Wi-Fi at McDonald's. That's what my AP World kids love to do. They would all go to McDonald's every day after class. I would usually end up giving them a couple dollars because I thought it was the coolest thing. I'm like, if I would have had that experience growing up where I could go with my friends to McDonald's and engage in Socratic seminars, who knows where I would have ended up. The library is definitely part of the solution and not an obstacle. It's the biggest space that you have in your building. Your librarians, although they have lots of books, also tend to be pretty technologically inclined. And sometimes that's not understood. So it's always worth engaging in conversation and seeing them as part of the solution. So folks, I do have a document. And if you want to type in this address or copy it down, it is case sensitive. And it's goo.gl. If you're in the Twitterverse or Twitter universe, you can take a picture and tweet it out. This isn't protected or anything like that. Share it out with your friends. And then once you've copied that down, I'd like to just engage in some conversations of who has gone paperless and what the impact has been and what some of the obstacles has been.